As China struggles to get a grip post its zero-COVID policies, their economy continues in a nosedive. With industries and manufacturing bowing out, a fresh wave of closures has brought in more doom and gloom. Join us as we uncover the bleak reality of Chinese industries. Bubbles bursting. The second largest economy in the world has been under a long, painful coma. Since the start of the pandemic, China's zero-COVID strategy has had negative side consequences on its economy. And even though the most strict public health standards in the country are no longer in effect, the alarming repercussions of it on the economy continue to rear their ugly head. It all started with the crazily inflated property bubble in China, which was constantly in danger of popping. And boy, did it pop. Currently, their largest cities are plagued by a crisis of unemployment. The labor force, which is consistently underpaid, is fighting to maintain customer demand. To make things worse, the one-child policy's impact on the demographics has only just started. But here's the thing, what happens in China does not remain in China. The economic trajectory of the nation with the largest population has significant effects on its trading partners and on geopolitics. You actually need to go beyond the previous 2 years in order to understand the current situation China is in. COVID made their underlying issues, which date back at least 10 years, worse. The real estate industry is where these issues are most obvious. And let's be clear, China has a growth model that discourages consumption in order to allocate more funds in investments and capital-intensive industries and infrastructure. Sure, this was a very wise strategy in the early phases of this model when China's infrastructure and housing were desperately deficient. But at this time, all of the low-hanging fruit has been picked. As a result of the low household income share and weak consumer demand, there are actually less options for profitable investment. The government was funding initiatives with little practical value, which is why the real estate market experienced the worst crash that sent all of their industries tumbling down. Everybody, including households, banks, and industries, suffered greatly in an attempt to control the real estate market crash, but alas, a mess of epic proportions. The second hit to China's economy ended up being the insanely high rate of unemployment, with nearly 1/5 of young urban workers unemployed. There's no buying power. For years, no one has been making any purchases. Then it got even worse because of COVID and the lockdowns. And the way to get out of this mess isn't easy at all. In relation to geopolitics, the United States and its allies have all reduced their reliance on Chinese inputs, goods, and commodities as tensions between the two countries have increased. The first wave of lockdowns taught Western corporations a valuable lesson, and many are now better prepared. But for others, trouble lies ahead as supply chains still struggle to recover from nearly 3 years of lockdowns. Apple has already come out with their issues with China. Analysts estimate that a third of Apple's inventory has been lost due to the closure of Foxconn's sizable iPhone factory in Zhengzhou. But logistics and supply chain issues resulted in a global production slowdown, not just at Apple. Chinese shipments by road and rail decreased by 36%, and those going to the US also fell, falling 34% from earlier in the year. As a result, China's supply to the auto industry was insufficient, which made it more challenging to buy a new automobile in the UK. Volkswagen announced that it had been forced to halt vehicle manufacturing at its facility in Chengdu due to an increase in the number of COVID cases, while Honda halted output at its factory in Wuhan. 2 of the 5 manufacturing lines at the German automaker's Changchun factory were also put on pause due to a component shortage. Some plants in manufacturing centers like Jiangzhou are slowly reopening now that the Chinese government has loosened its restrictions. But the most recent escalation of issues may be the straw that breaks the camel's back for relationships between Western businesses and suppliers in the second largest economy in the world. After investing billions of dollars to create a cutting-edge assembly line in China, executives at Apple's Cupertino headquarters described the persistent, unfixable issues and Beijing's lack of transparency as a gut punch. Long-term strategic ramifications for Apple, Tesla, and other businesses that depend on China's chip supply chain are only now coming to light. In fact, it's anticipated that Apple is fast-tracking its plans to move some of its operations to other nations, like Vietnam and India, rather than a just accept it and move on approach. The cracks. This general sense of mistrust and disappointment with China isn't reserved to tech and vehicle companies. Almost all retailers and manufacturers feel the same way, most on their way out. The Donald Trump-led trade fights with China and the pandemic disruptions of the previous 3 years have sparked a wider movement away from reliance on China, which has already started in countries other than the USA. For instance, the supply chain bottlenecks have already caused mayhem for British businesses, making it difficult to predict the effect the current ongoing slump will have. According to experts, 6 out of 10 businesses believe that supply chain issues in China posed the greatest threat to their operations, which is why more and more businesses started switching their factories from China to other countries. Now that changes business models significantly. They're unable to maintain entirely Chinese supply chains and would like to use things made in Munich or Manchester instead. The broader effects on China's own economy, which is already suffering from a downturn in its massive real estate market, is expanding more slowly than it ever has in the last 35 years. The fact that China is much more vulnerable overall than most Western observers have predicted is starting to become obvious to businesses. And they've got no one to blame but Xi Jinping. To be truly honest, the Chinese economy's potential for growth has been impacted by this, and the continued disruption of the global supply chain is only getting worse by the closures. Some Western fashion labels are being compelled to reconsider their long-standing reliance on manufacturers in China, not just because of these issues, but also because of increasing costs and concerns over working conditions. Several well-known brands, including Mango and Dr. Martens, recently reduced or announced their plan to move manufacturing outside of China or Southeast Asia. Even though it's still in its early stages, the country's move away from mass textile production reverses years of outsourcing to a region that has grown to dominate the textile supply chain. Factories of chaos. So the days of producing everything in China and delivering it elsewhere are, for many, long gone. In October 2022, another wild surge of the Omicron variant sent China spiraling further and exposing their awful work practices. Businesses in China were scurrying to reduce the effects of the rising infections. They distributed test kits, encouraged more work from home, and in some cases, purchased truckloads of medication. Plus, the teams on the ground in China were beginning to receive criticism for overseas headquarters of firms, with HQs asking, why can't the China operations navigate these restrictions? After all, every other market had to adapt, and they all did so effectively, right? But nope. The pandemic and forced, unending lockdowns created huge commercial disruptions as sick truck drivers disrupted supply chains, and personal shortages threatened to shut down manufacturing production lines. In order to keep production lines running, factory managers were either removing all restrictions or isolating workers at work premises. Like the closed-loop approach, in which employees were being forced to live and work on site during COVID outbreaks, was put in place in many factories. In one instance, tired of living under inhumane conditions, workers at a Zhengzhou factory organized a walkout after a COVID outbreak forced them to live in dormitories, but they soon ran out of food and medicine. Not even such dire strategies could save them from impending doom. Then, due to the multiple lockdowns in 2022, many employees faced pay cuts, consumer confidence plummeted, and many small and medium-sized businesses closed their doors. Even now, data doesn't seem encouraging, not one bit. The first few weeks of December saw a decline in the sales of cars and homes. Between December 1st and December 18th, automakers sold 946,000 vehicles, a 15% drop from the same time last year. And in the 30 largest cities, home sales have fallen 44% as compared to 2016. It's no surprise that manufacturing has dropped at factories as well. Cement and chemical fibers, 2 most important industries for China, have all reported very low numbers at their current production capacity. Let's not forget that up to 60% of the textile and dyeing business in the major manufacturing centers of the nation, the coastal provinces of Guangdong, Zhejiang, and Shandong, have declared a 2-month production shutdown. With more closures on the horizon, it's not looking good for the world's second largest economy. Let us know in the comments where you think the Chinese economy is headed. Make sure to subscribe for more news. We'll see you in the next video.